Good morning.
Good morning, Jan. Good morning, Jeff. Good morning, James.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can. I can't see any of you.
Oh, just a minute. I can see, excuse me.
There we
Ta-da.
go.
Okay. Well, I hope you all weren't waiting too long. I apologize.
No, no.
Not at all.
Um, well, Jim, I'd like to introduce you to Jeff. He's the moderator, and he and Jan
Jeff,
are
we
going to
can't
lead
see
this
you.
meeting. And Jan,
Jeff, we can't see you, Jeff.
Well, I see it on my screen. Do you
There
not?
you go. Okay.
Okay,
Now
maybe it
I
was
see
just
you.
delayed a little bit. You might be
Okay,
better
sorry.
off at this hour in the morning.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way.
well,
Sorry
anyway,
for
I wanted to
interrupting.
introduce you all to each other and turn it over to Jeff and Jan. She's going to be doing the program and writing, and Jeff the moderator of the speakers, and I'm here for the ride. And I sent you my part of the presentation, James, Jim.
You did.
We can talk about that as you like, but go ahead.
Oops.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Being a fan of your Turning to the Mystics, it's really a treat to be here in front of you. I've discovered that the last couple of years. Uh, Jan, I know you need some things for the bio and so forth, and I'll need some of that. Do you want to begin, Jan?
Sure, no problem. Jim, how did I get into this? Um, I asked the fateful question of Bob Hesse before I knew him very well. And what have you been working on, Bob? And he talked about his book, and that's how I kind of landed in the middle of all of this. I am his editor. And one of my delightful tasks for this conference is writing the information for the paper program that we're going to be giving to all of the attendees. And I want to go beyond, where you went to school, where you were born, and all this kind of stuff. My questions concern, the first one is, why did you agree to be a keynote speaker for the conference?
You want me to answer that right now?
Did I lose you? Yes.
I'll give you
I'm
my,
taking notes.
okay, I'll give you my immediate answer.
Okay.
Um, when I was growing up at home, I went through a lot of trauma from a violent alcoholic father.
Mhm.
And my mother was a devout Catholic, and I knew her faith was sustaining her through all of that. So when I was very, very young, I like prayed the way frightened children pray, and I experienced God's merging with me in a way that was very real to me. And when I was in the ninth grade, the violence kept getting worse. I read Thomas Merton's The Sign of Jonas, the journal he kept in the monastery. And the opening pages of that journal, Merton says, he said, as for me, I have but one desire, the desire for solitude to disappear into the secret of God's face. And at 14 years old, I said, me too. Like
Wow.
the depth from which he spoke accessed and awakened a depth in me. And so for the 4 years of high school, I corresponded with the monastery. And when I graduated from high school in 1961, I entered and lived there as a member of the community for 6 years. So this is a cloistered Trappist monastery, getting up at 2:30 in the morning and chanting the Psalms, and the hidden anonymity, lived in silence. It had a very profound effect on me, really. And I was so blessed. Thomas Merton, in his role as novice master, guided me, and he led me into the classical texts of the mystics and on this path. I also had a chance to study metaphysics, medieval philosophy from Dan Walsh, who studied under Gilson. So Duns Scotus and Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure. And so that was my life there. And I thought
And
it
this
was
is
fun.
at a very, oh gosh, when our minds are the most open
Yeah,
as a young person.
yeah, it just changed me forever. I can't explain really this kind of just these experiences I was having. And then Merton led me to the classical texts of the mystics like John of the Cross and Teresa. And because what they're really doing, this is Turning to the Mystics podcast, they're trying to help people to discern that they're being led by God into these more unitive states, and how to cooperate with that, even what that means to say that. And so there was all of that. So then I was sexually abused at the monastery. I had a breakdown by my confessor, a priest, and I left. I didn't tell anybody what happened. I left. I dropped out of the church for a while, and I was sustained by the Dharma. Thomas Merton introduced me. Thich Nhat Hanh came to visit there. Abraham Joshua Heschel came to visit. He was very interested in mystical Islam, and it got me. He was very taken. Ibn Arabi and these people, and so when I left, I came back into the Catholic Church like mystical Catholicism. I'd get up in the morning and I would quietly read Merton out loud, the same way that I would read Zen koans. And I came back into my own mother tongue of mystical Catholicism. And in that, I got married, had 2 children, and I wrote Merton's Palace of Nowhere on ultimate identity, how to be healed from all that hinders us from experiencing our ultimate identity hidden with Christ and God before the origins of the universe. Like, what's that path? And when that book, I was a high school religion teacher at the time at a Jesuit high school. And when that book came out, I started getting invitations to lead silent and contemplative retreats around the United States and Canada. And one of the very first people that invited me, and this is how I met Bob Hesse too, was on one of those retreats. He was there. And so a psychologist invited me to give it. He read the book, Merton's Palace. And his parents were missionaries, and they lived in India. And in India, although he was a Methodist minister in his own lineage in Christianity, he was very taken by the yogis in the ashram and the depth from which they spoke. And he was looking for that depth in Christianity. And he said, when he read The Palace, and he said to me, if you'd be willing to commit yourself to explore the contribution of the mystical traditions to mental health and to the science of psychology, I'll give you a PhD with family support in clinical psychology. So I went to Fuller Theological Seminary. I was still giving retreats, and I went to Fuller Theological Seminary for 6 years of full-time work. And so what I was really looking for as a clinician, as a contemplative clinician, I was introduced to the world of science, diagnostic codes, categories, axis 1, axis 2 on the DSM. But what I was really looking for is how to articulate the depth dimension of the healing encounter. And I phenomenologically explored that. And how, the way I put it is that my thesis statement was that in the axial moments of the psychotherapeutic process, the patient unwittingly assumes a stance strikingly akin to the stance assumed in deep meditation. And I walk through each word of that. By the patient, I don't mean the medical model, I mean the one who suffers. And by the axial moment, I mean this. When you're in therapy, you meet the person where they are, and you walk the walk with them in assessing and diagnosing and treating and so on. But then in the axial moment, there's a moment of turning. Like it turns like on a hidden axis, and the person drops down into a deeper place. I'll give one example of it. I was working with this woman who, she wasn't sexually abused or physically abused growing up. She was an only child, but her parents would violently scream at each other and scare her. But they were so mad at each other, they couldn't see how they were scaring her. And she felt invisible. And she told me that one summer night they were screaming at each other, and she went out to the back patio screen door, and there was a tree in the backyard. And she climbed up in the low branches of a tree. And she closed one eye and lined up a twig with a star. And she said to God, if you know I'm here, make that star move to the other side of that twig. Like
Oh my gosh.
And she said to me that the star didn't move, God didn't move the star. And then she said, and this is the axial moment, she said, but there's something about the remembrance of myself, sitting alone in the dark as a little girl in the low branches of a tree, waiting for God to move a star, that moves me. And I said to her, when you revealed yourself on that level, I was moved. And that's how God works in our life. So I said, I want to make you a deal. if you want to keep working with me, anytime you and I feel stuck in the work, imagine we're sitting together in the low branches of that tree, waiting. So I worked a lot with adult survivors of trauma who wanted spirituality to be a resource in their work. And I poetically use that phenomenological turning this way. And so it's so merged with me, it so suited me, trauma and and how the mystics and the deep trauma. This is also I did a series with Richard Rohr on mystical sobriety, on the mystical dimensions of each step of each AA. We have come to accept. See, we've come to admit that we're part of it. And so what's the mystical
I
dimension?
just finished, I
So
get daily, I get the daily meditation
yeah,
from Kat, and it's
yeah,
been what 2 or 3 weeks ago now that there was 2 weeks devoted to what that very thing that you're talking about,
yeah,
exploring the steps of AA. It was
yeah.
very powerful,
Uh,
incredibly powerful.
I was so grateful to share that. And then when I met Maureen, she was a she was in AA for years. And we were two Irish Catholics with Buddhist tendencies living together. And we were very introverted. We lived here at the ocean. I live right here. The ocean's right outside the window. And honest to God, the marriage was so healing for me, for both of us this way. And she died of Alzheimer's 3 years ago, right here in the living room in House Hospice. Her ashes are on the table there.
I read your
That's
book.
that's my life. Yeah, that's my life.
Mhm.
So I'd say that's my bio.
Okay. What I hear you telling me just now is that you've been walking toward this conference since you were 14 years old.
Exactly. When I was invited, I realized when I was given the doctorate in clinical psychology, I stumbled serendipitously into science.
Uh,
And I had to be a clinician. I had to honor science. So I had to honor the measurement of diagnosis and assessment. But what's the measureless dimension of measure? So one insight that I had when God said, "Let there be light," God, from the measureless depths of God, let there be light. God create that's the measureless foundations of measure, because light travels at a certain rate of speed. See? So there's the divinity of measure, which is a measureless dimension of measure. And so I started,
oh, you scientists drive me crazy talking like that.
I know, I'm so sorry. So that, anyway, that's my point. This would be the tone, I think, of where I'm coming from.
Mhm.
And I'm doing this book on the Enneagram with Kirsten Oates and on the Enneagram about science and faith in the Enlightenment, and how, looking historically, regretfully, they both went awry in a way. I mean, but how does
Yeah,
faith, but how we can make a corrective move and they illumine each other.
yeah.
And I see that's what the conference is, and that's what I see too. And I think
Okay. And kind of summing up what you just said, one of the other things, and I'm not going to hold your feet to the fire on this particular question. However, can you give me in, I don't know, 2 or 3 words, what the theme of your presentation is going to be? I want to, pardon me, it's called a tease. I'm a
yeah,
marketing person, I'm an advertising person, and I want to have 2 or 3 words that I can use kind of as a headline. But what will sum up what you're trying to share with the
yeah.
conference?
Well, I don't know if I can do it in 3 words, but I can do it in maybe 4 sentences. Then we can
Oh
just.
no, too long.
Okay.
Too long.
Here's what I want to do. I want to begin by uh, bearing witness to and embodying the mystical foundations of the Christian tradition. In other words, I don't want to explain it. I want to embody it and bear witness to it in the world that I was immersed in as a monk in the monastery. Like, what is that? Classically, like the Catholic, this thing. And to the mystics, Pope John the 23rd did his doctoral dissertation on faith in St. John of the Cross. That was his doctoral dissertation. And then I want to say this, then grounded in that experiential sensitivity. When I was given my doctorate, how as a clinical psychologist sitting with people being healed of trauma, that I see the 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 the, the depth dimensions of the healing process. Yes, there is reduction of symptom intensity, one would hope,
Mhm.
but there's something qualitatively deeper going on that transforms a person, and I want to do that.
Okay. All right. That I will pull out the 3 words I need from what you just told me. How's that? Okay. My second question, I think you answered that as well, as far as what key point do you want people to take away from your presentation? And if I understood you correctly, is recognizing that, what did you call it, axial moment,
Yes,
and how important that is
yes.
to our growth.
Yeah, I would add another dimension to it. Again, you have
Okay.
to distill it down.
Okay.
From a contemplative point of view, and this is, I want to say this in passing in my talk too with Merton, this is true of all the world religions. They have these dimensions
Right.
within the Christian dispensation of divinity, where I'm coming from, is this, is that the insight is that the foundations of trauma, and the etymology of the word trauma is suffering. The foundations of trauma are not found in the traumatizing of things that can and sometimes do happen to us on this earth. That's not the foundations of trauma. Nor are the foundations of trauma how it gets internalized as symptoms, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's not the foundation. The foundations of trauma is a traumatized capacity to habitually abide in the abyss-like love of God, welling up and giving itself to us breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat. That's the foundations of trauma. And so the depth dimension is you take the person into a depth where they drop down into that oneness, which transcends the darkness of this world, not as a way of fleeing from the suffering, but to draw from it to give you the courage to face the suffering and touch it with love. It actually becomes the depth dimension from which, on the depth dimension, on the horizontal plane, you're intuitively sensitive to how to help the person see the light shining through the hurting places and how to walk with that. And that's what I try to do.
Okay. Thank you. And what one thing would you like the attendees to know about James Finley? I know. I don't ask easy questions.
No, it's
Not my
not.
job.
I would say that I, I'm a graced wounded person.
Did you say graced?
Graced.
Okay.
I'm a spiritually awakened wounded person. That all of my trauma, and I went to a lot of therapy to work through the trauma, and not to romanticize the pain, but somehow it was in the trauma I was transformed and quickened in the trauma.
Okay.
That's the paradox. It's like, yes, and that happens right in therapy, like right in the midst of their tears. The light shines through their tears. You know, I'm trying to that I'm a gifted impaired person. You know what I mean? Like it feels like a poetic art form. It's nonlinear. Yeah.
Okay. Now I've asked my questions. My final question. Um, is there anything special about you or your work or your life that you want me to be sure to include in this brief? I know it's more of an introduction than a bio. Okay. But is there anything, one thing in particular that you want to make sure that I mention some way, shape, or form in this little essay, let's put it that way, that I'm writing about you?
Well, I mean, in one way, it's all the above.
I figured
But,
that, but
but I'll put it. Let me put it another way.
okay.
The insight is this: is it this unitive mystery is never other than the intimate immediacy of the way you are right now, sustaining you as unexplainably loved and holy in the midst of your wayward ways.
In other words, it's who you are in the sacred now.
Exactly. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, when you're loved. I mean, yeah, exactly.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and your candor.
Yeah, great questions, by the way. Great questions.
Thank you. Jeff?
All right, thank you. What I would like to do is just go over some of the mechanics, if you will, of the session. And Bob, please chime in because I've actually got a question for you on one of the elements. But doing the introduction when we begin the session, are there things, and I've looked over, your background information, your bio, listened, of course, to this. Are there things that you especially like to have included when people introduce you before a presentation?
No, I would put it this way. This is how I usually put it in the bio. That when I graduated from high school in 1961, I entered the Cloister Trappist Monastery, the Abbey of Gethsemane, where I lived for 6 years. And I was especially graced in having Thomas Merton as novice master guide me. I saw him as a living mystic. I saw he embodied the mystical lineage. And I was transformed by that. So that when I left the monastery, I still wanted to live. I got married. I still wanted to live that way in the world. And I wrote Merton's Palace of Nowhere. It took 5 years to write on ultimate identity. And out of that, I was given a doctorate in clinical psychology. And so I was giving silent retreat, so that it's that. I'll say this, we wouldn't say all of this, but I'll say what the thing is. For years, I was in a pattern where 3 days a week, I was seeing people in trauma and therapy. With Maureen, we had a 2-office suite. Then every other weekend, I would fly somewhere and lead a silent contemplative retreat somewhere in the United States or Canada. So on like 15 years. And those retreats were in silence, the meals were in silence, and so on. And I would speak from the mystics and letting the light shine into their daily life. And then at the end of the retreat, I'd get on a plane and fly back, and then I'd sit with people in trauma all 3 days a week. It was interesting, as sometimes they were the same people, and I was one of them. That's what struck me. We're all in this together.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Seriously. Jeez.
Let's see. There is going to be a big question that will be posed from the person that will be presenting before you, and it's for the person following, in this case, you, to respond to that. And I'm going to ask Bob a quick question here. Where did you want that? We introduce Dr. Finley, and at what point do you see having him respond to that big question that's posed to him?
Well, I'm thinking that he could respond to it any time during his presentation.
Okay.
It might be in the beginning, it might be a culmination of his presentation, and it might not relate to his presentation. I don't know. That's part of what we got to talk about. But
right.
The reason we did that, I put that together that way, is I was struggling to try to figure out how to make a conference have continuity and have flow. I've been to so many conferences where there's a guy that talks about one subject, then another. There's no relationship between the two. And so the theme of my book was kind of an evolutionary presentation of reality. And I was hoping to have that carry over to the speakers, but I don't want to tell them what to say. They're experts in their field.
Right.
And that was my default position.
Yeah, I want to add something to that, your book, what I liked about it. Ken Wilber's insight, include and transcend. And so to go from the brain to the mind, from the mind to, that evolutionary thing where you don't leave anything behind, it's included, but you're no longer limited to it. And I think it's so brilliant, and it's true. And so, yeah, so once I know what that big question is, at a certain point that feels right, I'll be sure to respond to it so they can see the link of how it flows. Yeah.
If you have not received that yet, we can mail that. The posed big question, at least from I have it, and correct me, Bob, if I'm not right, but it said, if theistic faith and prayer helps heal, how could it help to overcome confirmation bias?
Right.
And so
That's good. By the way, define confirmation bias. I have a generic idea of what it is. Confirmation bias is.
Yeah. Well, confirmation bias is that he's looking up for somewhere.
Yeah.
And then he gets you, Bob.
What I have found in my perspective, and I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist like you are, but trauma seems to embed in the unconscious the brain to defend itself so it doesn't happen again. And what happens is, and I'll give you a story because you tell stories to get points across. I'm going to give you my story. Okay. I'm in a prison and we're doing a retreat. And this black man comes up to me and he said, and he trusted me because I guess I was a deacon. He couldn't talk to the other prisoners about this. And he said, I'm afraid I don't know why I get scared every time I see a white policeman. And I said, well, that's normal. You probably had a bad experience with a white policeman. And in your unconscious brain is trying to protect you. And so it lumps all of those together. Now, a white woman, and I said this to him, it was risky. I said, a white woman tells me that she's afraid when she sees a black man. She's no different than you. She may have had a bad experience. The question is, in our defense, our brain is trying to protect us, but it's actually building a case for prejudice, because the definition of prejudice is you take the actions of one or more and you condemn the whole group they're from. And so the first step is you've got to unload that unconscious brain. That's really confirmation bias. You look for things that confirm your reality, so that if you see another black man rape a woman, and I didn't tell him this, or if you see a policeman, be brutal with a black man, it confirms your confirmation bias. It keeps feeding it. And that's where we have to break that confirmation bias.
Oh, very good. Yes. I'll respond to the way I would tend to respond to this question. Okay. In trauma work, they talk about triggering events. A triggering event is anything in the present that in some way resembles the original trauma, even though in all other respects it's completely different. That the limbic system of the brain, the pit of the stomach, will get triggered and you'll experience that, hyperventilate, heart will beat fast and so on. It's a somatic response. Right? And it's associated then with the belief around that, in which you generalize the traumatizing event and project it upon the current one. So, for example, one example I used when I was working at the VA hospital, then it was Vietnam vets, and they had post-traumatic stress disorder, dual diagnosis. They were also alcoholic, inpatient alcohol treatment. So I said, imagine someone comes back from Vietnam, Iraq, whatever, and they're sitting in their car, in their hometown, and at a red light, and the car next to them backfires. They have a panic attack because the loud sound is all that it takes to trigger it. So that's really true, because it's really, these patterns are really survival strategies formed in trauma and abandonment. It's trying to protect you from the catastrophic thing, but it's actually hindering you because it's generalizing it to the point that you're trapped in it this way. So what I say the approach is the whole part of therapy is that there is a you that's learning to see the bigger picture that contextualizes that. And you do see it. You can see how that happens. You can understand it, gain insight. But there's also the you that doesn't see it yet, because it still gets reactive. And therefore, you express non-judgmental, tender compassion on the part that doesn't see it yet. You have empathy with it. And really, you're incarnating God's empathy with that wounded part. I see you, dear one, and I'm here for you. No wonder you feel that way.
Mhm.
But I also, I see where you're coming from, but I also think there's a broader picture that if you gently just let it in this way, it would contextualize into a more reality-based, broader frame that would free you up to live your life this way.
That's the most difficult part of that whole process, though, Jim.
Yes.
For any of us who
Yeah.
suffer any kind of PTSD, that is the most difficult part of it.
That's the therapy.
Yeah.
And you sit with it. Another example I use, not to free associate here, how I work also on this, is that let's say you come to see me for therapy. I don't know what you want to talk about, other than the little bit you told me on the phone. But I've done it so much, I already know what's going to have to happen between us. If the healing you're looking for is going to have to occur, it's like a liturgy, ritual. We'll both sit down, you'll talk, and I'll listen. And at a certain point, I say, I want to ask you a question, and it's a real question. But the question I ask is such that in order to respond, you have to pause for a moment to listen to yourself, to know what to say. And you're becoming more present to yourself in my present. This is very subtle, very, very subtle. And then I say, well, let me say it back, edit it for me, because I want to know that we're together. Is this right? Just keep going. Then I say, I have another question, And then we get close to the hurting place, and we'll know we're getting close because you'll tear up. Or you'll laugh when you say something sad, or you'll change your body position. And then I say to you, if we don't get close enough to touch it, it festers. But if we move too fast, you'll get re-traumatized in here. You're in charge. So let's learn self-mastery, like let's back off. Let's talk about Jerry Seinfeld reruns or anything at all, and then just reapproach it. So how can we learn together to be present to the hurting place where it doesn't tip you over, and that transforms your character? And there's no right way to do this. The earlier the onset of the trauma, the more it was repeated, the more there was no rescue, the deeper it goes. So sometimes it's short-term, 6 months, sometimes it's 5. I was in therapy for 5 years for this. We walk our walk. We walk our walk. And little by little by little, there's a deep transformation that occurred. That's the approach I take. That is the therapy.
I think that answers the question. I think the way you've
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's it's in a lot more depth and perspective than I had in my book, because I don't do the therapy stuff. It's wonderful. By the way, the prisoner, I told him, I said, but you're doing great, because now you've identified it. It's a problem. It's not spontaneous. The fact that you can verbalize it gives you a chance to heal through our centering prayer that we're going to do. And that's what I said, but I didn't have your background. This is wonderful.
Yeah. Let me share another example that I use in therapy. I had this image that when the person is sitting in therapy, they're sitting encircled in their trauma. And I'm sitting there as the therapist, encircled as the healer. And if I stay clinically aloof, like diagnostically, they'll tell they're alone, that I'm not with them. So I have to be willing to take one foot and put it into their circle. And as I put it into their circle, if the intensity of their trauma is reactivating my own trauma, I can tell. That's what the traumatized person is afraid of. I owe it to you not to let you get too close to me. I'll bring you down. They have to believe I'm grounded in something that's deeper than the trauma this way. And at first, and so what I do is this, the way I put it, I would do it, I would sit in my therapy office. I always put my eyeglass case on the arm of my chair. And my glasses are in there. I kept my rosary in there, looked out the window. And I could tell when I was getting too close. So inside, I would back off and touch my rosary. And there were often birds on the telephone wire. I'd count the birds. And they thought I was taking session notes, but I was writing a grocery list. See? Because I owed it to the person and to me to take care of myself. And then once I got restabilized, I stepped back into the circle again. And at first they would attribute it to me. They would say, I feel so safe in here. And then I would say to them, but notice I'm not doing anything to you. You know what it is? What it is you feel safe in here because you feel safer in being with yourself in my presence. That if you can be more present to yourself in my presence, you can learn to be more present to yourself at home when you're not in my presence.
Mm.
How do you, those are the phenomenological ways that I would try to, just walk with people.
Jeff, I don't know if you have any other questions, but I just want to inject something here. I need to ask Bob a couple of the same questions that I asked Jim, because I want Jim to hear them as Bob heard his. I think it'll help both of them since they're kind of working together on this.
Before Bob answers at the end, I want to ask each of you, especially Bob, how the tone that I'm taking here resonates with you in terms of at the conference. You know what I mean?
Oh, it's powerful.
Yeah.
Incredibly powerful.
It's
I can
got this
tell you
added
from
dimension. It's got this added dimension of listening to you on Turning in the Mystics when you give a broad explanation, except I'm graced with the opportunity to see you. And
exactly.
so
Exactly.
it resonates very deeply.
Yeah.
Well,
Also, anybody who has been in any kind of therapy can relate. And you're giving a deeper explanation from the therapist's viewpoint than most do. So thank you for that.
That's why I think being invited to this conference, I think it was providential.
Mm.
It's so providential.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd like to address that. When I was picking the speakers, I didn't have a position for your role. I didn't know. I wasn't thinking. I couldn't figure it out. And then suddenly I thought, oh, shit, it's Finley. It's Finley. Why didn't I think of that? Then you gave me your book. And I thought, oh, my goodness. When you described your life and your journey, it was my journey.
Yeah.
And so now as you're speaking, what gives it wonderful context to the whole conference is the practical experience of dealing with people in trauma and actually storytelling. You talked to me about would it be okay to include personal stuff in the stories. I think that's powerful. And this is going to be a beautiful fit. I can tell you that the talk I'm going to give is going to be on the neuroscience side. And let me tell you where I see a linkage. When I was teaching centering prayer, and you read the book, so you got a sense that I was learning a lot from people's reactions to teaching centering prayer, and I'm not a psychiatrist, okay? So, and I saw what was happening, and I taught it to 10 people, and pardon me, yeah, and one of them I ran into later, and I said, how's it going? It was a man, and he said, well, suddenly he said, I had a real problem, concern. He said, suddenly I became fully aware of what really happened to me in Vietnam. And it happened during a centering prayer. I said, well, what did you do? He said, I ever so gently let it go and return to God. God. And so I told that to one of the top psychiatrists in Houston, who was also on the board of the Institute for Spirituality and Health that I was on, Dr. Lomax. And he looked at me, his eyes popped out. He said, we don't know how to treat PTSD, honestly. We struggle with it. We've got whole floors of patients at the VA hospital where he was practicing too, and very much of a struggle. So I thought, well, this would be a perfect thing to do research on. So I approached my neuroscience friend, Calixto Machado, and I said, I'd like to compare what I observed. In other words, compare the neurological phenomena of a near-death experience, of a PTSD experience, and the actual reliving of it during the prayer, and how it affected them and how it changed their brain neuroscientifically. And he said, well, I don't think we can catch them, in these acts. But he said, if you remember what's happening, you almost reproduce it. In other words, it's the whole basis of PTSD. And so he was encouraging me to compare near-death experiences with the contemplative experience, because I also observed that being relived during a prayer session 3 people relive their near-death experience. And so his whole idea was a lot of the remembering is accepted by neuroscientists as almost the same as actually the experience itself.
Exactly.
And I thought, wow, I never knew that neuroscientifically. That means we can study this stuff by having them remember the things while they're in the MRI machine or whatever. Mm-hmm. So this was an enlightenment to me.
Yeah. Beautiful.
A couple of other things that I would just like to bring up, and then Jan, defer to you on that. Following your presentation, we have structured into this time for a brief Q&A that I can pose some questions, either follow-ups on what you've brought, but I always find it effective to ask whoever the presenter is to suggest, here are some things that might not be elements that I'm directly including in my presentation, but they might be good things for us to touch on that would then lead into the next presentation. We don't have to develop those right now, but if you have some thoughts, by all means, we could share those, or we could just reach out later on and in whatever form would be convenient for you. And then I can just sort of have those jotted down. So when we're doing the conference, I've got an idea of what I can go ahead and ask. Anything jump to mind right now, or would that be better for us to circle back as we approach this?
No, I like that. I'll think of some things. I'll share 2 things as an example.
Okay.
What we're thinking of really is the physiology of the spirit. That is, the somatic physiology of the limbic system is the physiology of the interiority of the self. This way. And so I like Dan Siegel's insight that the mind is not in the brain. If you cut the brain open, you won't find the mind in there. Mm-hmm. But the brain is in the mind when you're thinking about the brain.
Oh, so God, as a word person, you all are playing semantics.
We are. It's like koans. Like it's true. It's really true. And this thing, like, what it does, it uncouples mechanistic, reductionistic, myopic, one-dimensional ways of looking at things, and let's light shine to see the truth of ourselves. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's exactly. Yeah. The other thing that I would just mention is, and I've been by means of preparing for this, just going over some elements of the material that Bob had provided, and watched a couple of his lectures. I watched a couple of your presentations on YouTube. But so I'm just sort of scanning down through my notes. Unfortunately, I typed it because I can't usually read my own handwriting. But
I can't either.
Yeah, well, join the group.
There will then be a big question, as Bob calls it, that you'll pose to him. And that is, what does neuroscience teach the effects of prayer and psychotherapy? He'll then seek to answer that. We know from what he's talking about that he'll be doing exactly that. There will be a dialogue between the two of you. And so that's just something to think about. As you know more of what Bob is going to talk about, just what sort of things you think would be fruitful for you two to talk about. And then there'll be a panel discussion at the end. And Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's going to be the two of you, Dr. Hammeroff, Dr. Koenig, and then 3 of the faith leaders, Reverend Davis, who, if I remember correctly, she's an Episcopal priest. Is that right, Bob?
Yes,
she is.
And Rabbi Rosenstock, and then Imam Jamal Rahman. And it'll be sort of focusing on the things both of you have talked about, but then bringing their sense of context to that as well.
I've been thinking about these panel discussions, Jeff, and Bob too, for that matter. And I believe what's going to happen, particularly with that last one, because of what Jim and Bob are going to be doing in their presentations. That last one is going to really sum up the entire conference, and having the three faith leaders on the stage will hopefully put the science and faith in context with each other in a little more, how can I make it my own type thing, for the people in the audience. How can we were talking about this yesterday in my legacy group, that the sign of a good homily is when the listener leaves and they take something away from that homily. And I think that's what our goal is in that final panel discussion, is one thing, and it's going to be pretty much different for everybody in the audience, but hopefully there'll be something that they'll take away from the conference. And I'm glad I'm not up there. It's your job to try and make this happen. Am I correct in that summary?
Right, yes. Right. When you agree, she's correct. Yes, yes. I want to add one more thing. This came real big out of the Living School. The students would go through this program, a commitment to prayer and meditation, immersion in the mystical texts of the Christian mystics, and applying that to daily life. Then when it was over, they were just gone. So they would form cohorts. That is, they would form groups. So they would keep in touch. And some of them are still together. The very first one, they still say, so like, where do we go from here? Like through the internet, offering, this doesn't stop here. You know what I mean? It's like the sounding of something that can go on for an expansive kind of enriched dialogue with each other. And I think, too, that's one of the great benefits I see the potential this program has this way.
One of the things that I'm writing in, if you call it, I'm thinking of it as the introduction to the program, is at the end of that essay, there's 3 things that I hope they take away from the conference. One of which is, I hope you met one person with whom you will stay in touch after you leave Rome. So you and I are kind of on the same wavelength where that's concerned, that if they found one person, whether they agree or disagree, but they found one person that they'll stay in touch with, again, that's another, to me anyway, a sign that the conference was successful.
It's true. That's really true.
So, Bob, are you ready?
That's an example. I want to show one little thing. This is an example where the transpersonal, the intrapersonal, and interpersonal all kind of resonate back and forth with each other.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's unity, which includes the dead, the mystical body, it's just the interconnectedness of us all.
That's right.
We're trying.
That's kind of what this whole conference is about, Jim, though, is the interconnectedness.
It is.
Yeah, if I defined one word, I think that would be it.
Yeah.
Bob, you and I have talked a lot over the last 5 years about a lot of different things. And
I was afraid this was coming.
well, hey, I put everybody else on the spot. Why should you be any different?
I felt sorry for you, and now I'm going to get it.
I have already written part of this for you, where you're concerned about the keynote speaker part. And just to share it with the 2 gentlemen on this call, Bob has struggled with, he doesn't want it to be all about Bob. And my argument, and when Lyndon's been involved in it, his argument is, hey, yeah, it's got to be. I mean, the book is yours. It's your story. And yes, you're translating it into hopefully something people can identify with. But basically, you're the heart of this conference. And so what I've told him is accept it. Whether you like it or not, or agree with it or not, you are the heart of this conference. So going from there, that's why you're the keynote speaker at the end. What is one key point from your presentation that you want people to remember? I think I know what it is, but I don't want to make any assumptions here.
I want to bring people together in the silence where there's no dogma. So we get over this stuff of different religions. And not that we don't still respect each other's beliefs, but that when we have a conference or we talk to each other, it can be done at a different level. It can be done at a contemplative level where we all share the same indwelling God. We all share the same neuroscience. We all share the same psychology and psychotherapy that we need. And that we can offer this to people that are of different faiths as a part of treatment in hospitals or wherever. And the reason that we're doing the research is because there's resistance in hospitals and places that they do not mix religion and science. And yet that's where it's been for a long, long time. That's why it was just divorced and brought back and is in the process of being brought back. And Dr. Harold Koenig is going to be a powerful speaker prior to Finley, because he's going to talk about the research on that and how it demonstrates that we've got to stop divorcing spirituality and religion and medicine. It can't be. That's a long answer, but that's it.
Yeah, I'll get it down to 5 or 6 words. You know, I'm good at that. I've been editing you for a long time. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. What is one thing that you would like the attendees to know about Bob?
I'll give that answer in a conversation I had with our dedicated prayer person, Father Keating.
Okay.
I went in to meet with him privately, and I was in my 50s and coming back to my senses and struggling with my wife's illness and not being in control and thought I needed to be and whatever. And I said, Father, I need an answer to this question. Why did it take me so long, my whole life, to figure out that the only important thing is love? And he was soft-spoken. I couldn't quite hear him. And he whispered to me, and I leaned forward to get it all. And he said, because you're human.
That was his response, huh?
And the fact that it's such a simple message, but once we get over this concept of judging others because we cannot climb inside their brain, and that was the lesson. And ultimately, if you can't climb in somebody's brain, you can't attribute guilt. You can't attribute things to them doing something evil or what, you can't do that. You can't determine who's evil, who isn't. Forget it. All we do is show love. That's it. And in that process, that healing takes place, and you start enjoying life more. You start seeing God dwelling within others once you've experienced the God dwelling within you. And when I started to see God dwelling with others, it changed my life.
Okay.
That was peace. That's where I got peace.
Okay.
Joy.
Thank you. And the last question, is there anything other than what you've already shared that you would like me to include in this short, whatever you want to call it, introduction?
You mean about what we want to do, or me personally?
Whatever you feel like you want to make sure that I include about you, your presentation, the book, your life, whatever.
Okay, let me answer what I'm going to try to do in my presentation, and then that'll flow. I've got the dubious job of trying to summarize the conference, give my portion of it, mention everybody, hopefully, and their contribution, somehow weave it in. You saw my PowerPoint presentation, I was attempting to do that. But aside from all of that, which is the impossible, I would like to have a path forward laid out. Where do we go from here? And that would be more in the availability of this interfaith contemplative practice being offered to those who are suffering from various illnesses, and take it into the medical community. And that's why our next conference would be planned for 2 years later in Houston, the home of the largest medical center in the world. That's it.
Okay. I will find a way to put that in there. Thank you. That's all my questions for today. Other than Jeff, one of these days, you and I are going to have the same conversation.
Well, you know, interviewers are especially recalcitrant in providing answers about themselves. You know,
I
I
know.
like to say that I view the job of moderating as sort of being like an air traffic controller, that you try to keep all the planes up, and if you do your job well, nobody remembers you. They just know that all the planes landed and
That
took off.
everything was, yes, and I get that. And yes, I understand that.
But
But
I'll be, yeah,
in your, because I want you to be speaking to me through the rest of these Zoom calls that we're going to have, we'll do ours privately. I won't put you on the spot in front of everybody else. But now that you've heard the questions 3 different times, you know the things I'm going to be asking.
That's right. That's right.
So you're getting a lot more preparation than any of these other people get.
Jeff, for Jim's benefit, it would be a good idea if you have time, Jim, to listen to Jeff's story a little bit, what his background and all is. That's probably asking the question she just didn't want to ask, but
what did you you and I have had lengthy conversations, both you know, during the Merton conference that we met each other, and then since then. What specifically did you want me to go into?
Just your general background, Jeff. Just
Okay.
to give Jim an idea.
why are
of
you
who you
here, Jeff?
Why am I here? Okay.
Yeah, right. Why did you agree to take on this monumental job that Bob keeps giving you these extra things to do? It's kind of like, give it to Jeffy. He'll handle it.
Well, I would say, number one, my background is both in science journalism and then also as a meteorologist. And I was one of those guys that you maybe did or did not watch on TV and say, why don't they ever get the forecast for my area right? And but I've done that. And since then, I've sort of taken that background as I retired from television to really delve into environmental and climate change issues and try to relate that to faith. I noticed that you had done a presentation. I didn't get a chance to watch it yet, but with John Deere. And I do a program now that's an interview program. And in fact, I've got a copy of his book that we did an interview. He came up here to Seattle, and we talked about his work, but especially how it relates to the environment. When I retired from television, I had come to know a fellow who had come also from Ireland, Father William Tracy. And when he came here, it was during the Kennedy election, Nixon-Kennedy election. And there was a lot of anti-Catholic prejudice at that point. And a local rabbi went into the Archbishop's office here in Seattle and said, you know, we Jews know something about prejudice. He said, I would suggest we get 3 of us together from different faith backgrounds and just talk. And so they did that. And it was on 14 years. And Father Tracy, who just passed a year and a half ago at the age of 103, liked to note that his program was on longer than MASH. He said, we didn't have the numbers, but he said, I'd like to think that we made as big an impact. Well, we had a number of centering prayer retreats up at his facility that he co-founded with the rabbi. And somebody asked him, they said, oh, did you hear Jeff is retiring from TV? And he said, well, yes, he's going to come work for me. There was only one problem. I hadn't heard this before. And so lo and behold, I ended up on this interfaith organization that had been called Tracy Levine Center, now Paths Understanding, serving on the board. And then he wanted to come up with a new version of the television program that was called Challenge. We now call it Challenge 2.0. And we try to basically focus on different issues with a view to basing it not just on faith. Seattle is known as being one of the least churched areas. And so we sort of view it through the lens of values, ethics, and sometimes faith. And so we cover a big range of things on that. So that's sort of professionally where I'm at. Personally, in terms of why I was interested, this goes back a long time ago. But as a young science reporter in 1980, when Mount St. Helens erupted, I was assigned to literally live down on the volcano. The upshot on all of that was that when it erupted, we were flying in and around doing coverage because I have a bit of a background in earth sciences as well as meteorology. And we were pressed into service to locate or try to locate either survivors or victims. Very close to the last place we were camped, I discovered one victim, one of those that we discovered, that was parked maybe 50 yards away from where we had been camped. And he had been exposed to temperatures of about 850 to 900 degrees. Without going into detail, that's not a view that you'll see that you'll easily forget. And the effects of things like that are pretty well known in terms of people in law enforcement in the military, but not well appreciated in terms of people in the media. And so in the process of trying to come to terms with that and recover from that, I discovered centering prayer, basically because other things weren't working very well. And that led me through a chain of events to become deeper and more deeply involved in all of that, and have always had a strong affinity for Thomas Merton. And so Bob and I met each other at a Thomas Merton retreat back at St. Mary's College in Notre Dame just a little bit more than a year ago. I think that was last June. So that's in a thumbnail, probably longer than I needed to go on, but I'm a broadcaster. We like to talk.
Basically, what I heard you
the
just
question.
say, yeah, basically what I heard you just say is your version of the other two men on this call and how they got to where they are today. It's very, there's elements of this, of if you want to call it sameness, which is a bad word, but in all three of your stories on how you got to this conference.
Triune
This path. Pardon me?
Triune trauma here.
Yeah. Well, there's that, but it's also triune understanding and recognition and realizing that there is something more and searching for that something more. All three of you, in your own way, your own story, have done that. And I suspect a lot of the people who decide to join us next June will have that same recognition, that what I think of as light bulb moment, that, you know what, their stories aren't that different than mine. Kind of that, what we're talking about, that universal, that connectedness. I heard that this morning from the three of you. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing that. It's been transforming for me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would say, just in summing up from my perspective, and I won't make a pest of myself, but as we get closer to the conference, if I can just link up, I know I'll be talking to you, Bob, but Dr. Finley, if I can link up with you just on some of the question and answers and the panel discussion of things that you think would be fruitful, that I can sort of put down.
Here's what I would like. I know I'm anxious to do this with Bob, that from this point on, any one of us who feels the need to reach out and talk to others will be in ongoing touch with each other as needed.
Absolutely.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
That would help.
Okay,
That would
thank
help
you.
me.
That's very generous.
Yes, thank you.
I wonder
What
if
is
I
your-
might ask. Oh, go ahead,
My
Jen.
question kind of is one of those mechanical things. What is the best way, as far as you're concerned, Jim? Would it be via email?
Yeah. Here's how this works with me.
Okay.
Okay.
I write 6 hours a day every morning. Then in the afternoon, I rest and I do 2 Zoom calls. So what I do is, if you call me on my personal email, finley1@gmail.com, include your cell phone. And sometime late morning, early afternoon, I can call you to schedule a Zoom call.
Oh,
I'll
okay.
send you
Oh,
I'll
wonderful.
send you the link via your email, and just
Okay.
click on it, and you can hit record if we think it would be, something to have or not. And that's what works for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
By the way, Jim, I'm recording this as you had requested, and I will put it on a YouTube private site so that you can all look at it if you want.
Well, that would be nice.
Good, thank you.
Usually that's thrown up on the screen that you know that we were recording it. I didn't have to tell you. And I think, Jim, I'd like for you, if you would, to take a look at that PowerPoint presentation. I realize there are no words connected with it, but you might get a feel for how I'm going to be approaching it. And I would be open to anything that you might be able to say, well, I'll cover that, or you should cover that, or whatever.
I'd love to do that. And I'd also like to talk with you more about my talk. So I keep refining it. But I'll tell you an initial impression I had in looking at those things is that you start out, see this mystical sense of God's love. And then what you do is a series of realms in which that's manifesting itself. Like you can see the line of continuity running through these different thing, and I saw that as the pedagogy, you know what I mean, the effectiveness of what you're doing. That was one of my initial insights, but we'll talk more.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to include about a 4 or 5 minute video of a patient that had Parkinson's, because we got recordings of different patients. Parkinson's, and once taught, goes into total silence. It was in the middle of a freeze and went down. And that could be more dramatic than all the neuroscience scans.
Yeah.
What's the practical application?
Practical.
What that people, most of us human people that live down on Earth, that's what we're interested in. And if somebody in our family, for example, has Parkinson's or suffers from PTSD or whatever, seeing what it really does or what it can do, wow, that's more powerful than anything. That's more powerful than all the theories in the world.
So if you look at that presentation I sent you, Jim, you can actually, it was actually the hard presentation. So you can click on that slide and you'll see the video.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
This has been a very productive meeting, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you likewise.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
I have a request then. If one of you or all three, one of you could send me an email and include your phone numbers in the email.
Certainly.
And then I'll know I'll have it right in front of me. And you have mine. I'll give you mine, 310-367-1180. And that way anyway, that will help me. I can scotch tape it to the front of my screen here and I know how to reach you. So
Okay. I think I trust you with that information, I think. I don't give that out to just anybody. We also have, all of us, I believe, have a pretty good sense of humor, which will get us through a lot of this. Let's see, what I'm trying to think of the right word. Will get us through the different obstacles we may bump into along the road to Rome next year.
Yeah. Well, Jim, I wanted to mention something while we're together real quick. I don't want to hold everybody any longer, but I've been in conversation with my publisher, Crossroad. You're familiar with them.
yeah.
And they are going to publish my second book. And they've asked to consider publishing a book with the results of our research. And I thought that was rather interesting. I'm going to see about that. And it might be something that you might also be interested in too. So we could talk about it. Yeah.
Yes, I might. I was talking, Orbis Books did my memoir. I have 3 essays I want to publish. I have 3 books, 3/4 done. And we're trying to, not counting the Enneagram book 4. So we're trying to decide what house to send them to, like what's best. And so, yeah, I would be interested. I really respect Crossroads. It's a good house.
They're powerful. I gave a presentation at their office in Freiburg. And I was an unknown author. And he said, now, don't worry if only 1 or 2 show up. They had 25 people show up, and it's not me. And it was the subject matter. It's a subject matter.
Yeah, I want to end by disclosing something about myself, my secret grandiosity. when I'm speaking there, I have this fantasized image that I'm speaking, and the Pope is in the front row taking notes. And he raises
Oh,
his hand and he has a question. I don't like to think.
you know what? From your lips to God's ears, that we that happens.
Anyway, thanks so much. This is wonderful. Gift.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. And again, a pleasure having this opportunity to talk.
Yeah, I look forward
Yes,
to our
definitely.
friendship, our ongoing friendship with each other too. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to a lot of things about next June, but I think right at the top of my list is the cocktail party the night before all this starts.
Yeah.
To get to visit, and everybody the speakers are all together.
We haven't
The
announced
dynamic
that.
there
We haven't
is going
announced
to
that
be-
yet, Jim. We haven't announced that yet, Jim. But it's going to be on the terrace of the Paulo 6 Hotel, and you at night you look over the wall of St. Peter's Square, and you see St. Peter's lit up about 100, 200 yards away, and you toast with your scotch or your wine. It's wonderful.
Oh, you know, I just got back from Spain. Chris knows her husband, and we were in Madrid at the Prado, you know, the art museum.
Mhm.
Then we went to Barcelona, Gaudi's, the Basilica of the Holy Family. Then we took a train up to the walled city of Avila, where Teresa of Avila lived. And the cloistered nuns still live in that. To the girl, you could hear them saying the rosary and so on. It was just stunning, you know, a sense of antiquity and culture and art. So to be in Rome uh, like that, you know, and there's a sacramental quality to the location.
Absolutely.
Big time. Yes, it's really true. Yeah.
By the way, real quick, would you give us a link to your website where you're advertising the conference? Because we're trying to get all the speakers to do that because we want to be sure there are enough registrants and everybody signs up.
I'll talk to Paul Swanson at CAC. They said they would do that. So I'll take care of that. I'll keep in touch with you to see that they do that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Everybody I can't keep track of all these times. So I hope everybody has a really good rest of their Friday, however much time is left in your Friday.
Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Thank you much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.